He had learned that space stations smelled like metal and recycled air long before he ever stepped onto one. But standing inside the orbital hall of Varelion made the idea real in a way no briefing ever had. The ceiling arched overhead in layered rings of light, each band humming softly as energy flowed through it. Human boots sounded too loud on the polished floor, and Elias Rourke felt every step echo back at him. He was a systems engineer, not a diplomat, not a soldier, and definitely not someone meant to be standing in a royal receiving corridor. His presence there was an accident born of a malfunction report and a translator shortage. He told himself to keep his eyes forward, hands visible, posture respectful, just like the training video said. That discipline lasted exactly 3 seconds after he saw her. The alien princess stood at the far end of the hall, framed by softly rotating holograms and 2 silent guards, and Elias forgot every rule he had memorized. Her people were tall, luminous in a way humans were not, their skin holding a subtle sheen as if starlight lived just beneath it. She wore a dark, sculpted garment that suggested armor more than ceremony, fitted with unfamiliar materials that caught the light and bent it. A crown-like circlet rested in her pale hair, delicate and sharp at once, like frozen lightning. Her eyes were the most disorienting part, bright and intent, locking onto his with startling precision. Elias felt a strange pressure in his chest, not fear exactly, but the sensation of being seen too clearly. He did the only human thing that came naturally in the moment. He smiled. It was a small, reflexive expression, polite and nervous, the kind he had used 1,000 times to diffuse awkward situations back on Earth. The guards stiffened immediately, weapons shifting by a fraction. The princess did not. She tilted her head slightly, studying him, and something unreadable passed across her face. Elias's smile faltered, but it was too late to take it back. He lowered his gaze a fraction, heart hammering, silently cursing himself for breaking protocol in the first 5 seconds. Silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the station. Then the princess stepped forward. Her movement was smooth and unhurried, each step deliberate, and Elias realized with a jolt that she was approaching him directly. He swallowed, forcing himself to stand still as she closed the distance between them. Up close, he could see the fine details of her features, the subtle geometry that marked her as not human but undeniably person. Her presence carried warmth, not physical heat, but a kind of focused intensity that made the air feel charged. She stopped an arm's length away and looked straight into his eyes again. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Elias wondered if he had just committed an interstellar insult that would end his career. When she finally spoke, her voice flowed through the translator in his ear, clear and calm, carrying a musical cadence. "You greeted me," she said, not as a question. "Yes," Elias replied, his voice sounding smaller than he liked. "I'm sorry if that was inappropriate." The princess's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close enough to make his breath catch. "Inappropriate," she repeated thoughtfully, as if tasting the word. She turned slightly, gesturing toward the hall behind her, and spoke again, this time louder. "Attend," she announced. "This human has offered a sign of personal favor." A murmur rippled through the gathered officials and attendants, a low wave of surprise that Elias felt more than heard. His stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to correct her, to explain, to apologize again, but no sound came out. The princess looked back at him, eyes bright with a spark that might have been amusement. "You did not know," she said softly, as if that explained everything. Elias could only shake his head, the world tilting slightly around him. She straightened, her posture shifting from curiosity to something more formal, more commanding. "Then you will learn," she said. With that, she turned and began to walk away, attendants parting before her, guards falling into step. One of them paused just long enough to gesture for Elias to follow. His feet moved on their own, mind racing as he tried to piece together what had just happened. A smile, he thought numbly, just a smile. He had smiled at an alien princess, and somehow, impossibly, everything had changed. They led him into a smaller chamber adjoining the hall, its walls alive with softly shifting patterns. Elias barely noticed the technology, his thoughts spiraling too fast to settle on anything concrete. The princess stopped at the center of the room and turned to face him again. Her attendants withdrew to the edges, forming a silent ring, their attention fixed on the pair. Elias felt suddenly exposed, every human instinct telling him he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. She regarded him for a long moment, expression composed but eyes keen. "Your name," she said. "Elias Rourke," he replied automatically. "Elias," she repeated, and the sound of it in her voice felt strangely intimate. "You are far from your origin world," she observed. "Yes," he said, managing a weak nod, "but I was assigned here temporarily." "Assigned," she echoed, then inclined her head slightly. "I am Princess Elith of Verelion." The name carried weight, and Elias felt it settle over him like gravity. "I understand now," she continued, "that you did not intend the meaning of your gesture." Relief flickered through him, brief and fragile. "But intention," she added, "is only one part of significance." She stepped closer again, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Among my people, a smile offered unguarded, without fear, is a declaration of trust." Elias's heart skipped. "Trust given to royalty," she went on, "is rare, and when it is given freely, it carries binding weight." He swallowed hard, mind scrambling for a response that would not make things worse. "I didn't know," he said again, the words feeling inadequate. "I believe you," Elith replied. Her gaze softened, just slightly. "That does not undo what has been done." She straightened and addressed the room once more. "By ancient accord," she announced, "the human Elias Rourke is recognized as one who has offered himself in favor." The murmurs returned, louder this time, edged with something like excitement. Elias's ears rang as he tried to process the implications. He felt as though he were standing on the edge of a vast drop, the ground crumbling beneath him. Elith turned back to him, her expression now openly calm, assured. "In your customs," she said quietly, "such declarations may be symbolic. In ours, they are not." He stared at her, the words sinking in with terrifying clarity. She inclined her head once more, a gesture of formal acknowledgement. "You will be introduced," she said, "as my future husband." The room seemed to tilt, lights blurring as Elias struggled to keep his balance. Every rational thought he had insisted this was impossible, a misunderstanding that would surely be corrected. Yet the way Elith looked at him held no doubt, only certainty. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing that whatever came next, his life had already veered onto a path he had never imagined. The chamber seemed smaller now, as if the walls had edged closer while Elias stood frozen in the wake of her declaration. Attendants watched him with open curiosity rather than hostility, their expressions ranging from fascination to quiet calculation. Elith dismissed them with a subtle motion, and the ring loosened, giving him space to breathe. Elias drew a slow breath, steadying himself the way he did when machinery threatened to cascade into failure. He focused on details he could understand, the hum of power beneath the floor, the faint vibration in the air. It helped, a little, grounding him in a reality that still obeyed rules. Marriage to an alien princess, unfortunately, did not feel like something that followed any rule he knew. Elith gestured toward a curved seat grown seamlessly from the wall, its surface rippling before solidifying. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. He obeyed, more out of instinct than choice, lowering himself carefully. She remained standing, hands folded behind her back, posture elegant and unyielding. For a long moment, neither spoke, and Elias wondered if this silence was another test he was failing. He glanced up at her, searching for signs of jest or manipulation. What he saw instead was composure, and beneath it, something earnest. "You are troubled," Elith said at last, as if narrating an obvious fact. "Yes," Elias admitted, rubbing his palms against his trousers, "that feels like an understatement." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the point. "You fear loss of autonomy," she said, "and consequences beyond your choosing." "That's one way to put it," he replied, managing a thin smile that felt brittle. Her eyes tracked the movement of his mouth, attentive in a way that made him self-conscious. "In Verelian custom," she continued, A declaration does not erase consent, but it creates obligation. Elias frowned, latching onto the distinction. Obligation to do what? He asked carefully. To learn, she said simply, and to decide with knowledge rather than ignorance. She stepped closer, the light glinting off the circlet at her brow. You will not be forced, she added, her voice firm. If you choose refusal, it will be honored, but it will not be without cost. The words settled heavily between them, honest and unembellished. Elias exhaled, tension easing just enough for thought to return. Cost to whom? He asked. Elith met his gaze squarely. To me, she said, and to the fragile peace my people maintain. She turned, pacing slowly, as if arranging her thoughts in motion. My position binds me to symbols as much as policy, she explained. Your gesture was witnessed, interpreted, and now woven into expectation. Elias followed her movement, mind racing through parallels of human politics he had only ever read about. So I'm a symbol now, he murmured. Yes, she replied without hesitation. And a person. The emphasis surprised him, and he looked up sharply. She stopped pacing and faced him again, eyes steady. I will not reduce you to less than you are, she said. Your species values individual will, and I respect that. Something warm flickered in his chest, an unexpected swell of gratitude. That might be the first comforting thing I've heard all day, he admitted. Her lips curved, a genuine smile this time, brief but unmistakable. Then we are progressing, she said. She reached out, hesitated, then withdrew her hand, as if reconsidering the intimacy of the act. I propose a path forward, Elith continued. You will remain under my protection while you learn our customs. In return, she added, you will allow the introduction to stand for now. Elias weighed the words, feeling the enormity of the decision press against him. Temporary acceptance felt safer than immediate refusal, a way to gather information before acting. I don't see how I have many better options, he said slowly. Her nod was decisive, almost relieved. Then we are aligned, she said. A chime sounded softly through the chamber, and a translucent display blossomed in the air. Symbols and translated text scrolled past, outlining schedules, protocols, and ceremonial appearances. Elias stared at it, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what lay ahead. This is a lot, he said quietly. It is, Elith agreed. But you will not face it alone. She gestured, and the display minimized, leaving the space calmer. Come, she said, extending her hand this time without hesitation. He looked at it for a heartbeat, then took it, her grip warm and steady. The contact sent a strange jolt through him, not unpleasant, but startling in its intensity. Together, they walked from the chamber into a corridor that overlooked the station's inner ring. Stars wheeled slowly beyond the transparent barrier, a reminder of how far from home he truly was. Elith slowed her pace to match his, a small but telling adjustment. You are afraid, she said softly. Yes, Elias replied, watching the stars drift by. But I'm also curious. Her eyes brightened at that, a spark of approval. Curiosity, she said, is a strength your people wield well. They reached a lift platform, and as it descended, Elias felt the weight of the station shift beneath them. He wondered how many lives had been changed by small gestures, misunderstood or magnified by culture. A smile, he thought again, had brought him here. As the lift slowed, Elith turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Our futures are now entangled, she said. Whether briefly or for a lifetime depends on what we choose next. Elias met her gaze, a sense of resolve settling alongside his fear. Then I guess it's time I start choosing carefully, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, as the platform came to rest and the doors opened onto whatever came next. The lift doors parted onto a terrace that curved along the station's inner hull, revealing a sweeping view of the central atrium below. Elias felt the openness immediately, the sense of standing at the edge of something vast and alive. Light cascaded from the core like a slow waterfall, illuminating layers of walkways and suspended gardens. He stepped out beside Elith, aware of how naturally his pace matched hers now. The murmur of distant voices blended with the soft resonance of the station systems. It felt less like a machine and more like a city breathing. For the first time since his arrival, wonder pushed back against fear. Elith paused near the transparent barrier, resting her hand against the surface as she gazed inward. "This place was built to remind us of continuity," she said quietly. Elias followed her gaze, tracing the flow of traffic and light below. "It's beautiful," he admitted, the word feeling insufficient. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the sentiment. "Beauty has function," she replied. "It calms, it focuses, it persuades." Her eyes flicked toward him, measuring his reaction. Elias nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. They walked along the terrace, the barrier curving with them as if guiding their path. Elith gestured toward a cluster of figures ahead, their attire marking them as high officials. "You will meet my council," she said. Elias felt tension coil in his chest again, but he steadied himself. "Do they already know?" he asked. "They know what has been announced," she replied, "and little else." "That sounds intentional," he said. "It is," she confirmed. They approached the group, conversation quieting as attention shifted to them. Elith straightened subtly, authority settling over her like a mantle. Elias felt the change and adjusted his posture, standing a fraction taller. Introductions followed, names flowing past him, filtered through translation and nerves. He focused on faces, expressions, trying to read intent in unfamiliar features. Some looked curious, others wary, a few openly intrigued. One elder stepped forward, gaze sharp and appraising. "You are the human," they said, voice resonant and calm. "Yes," Elias answered, meeting their eyes steadily. "You understand the weight of what has been declared," the elder continued. "I'm learning," Elias replied honestly. A ripple of reaction passed through the council, subtle but unmistakable. Elith watched him closely, her expression unreadable. "Learning is acceptable," the elder said after a pause. "What matters is whether you endure the learning." The words felt like a challenge rather than a threat. Elias inclined his head, choosing humility over bravado. "I intend to try," he said. That seemed to satisfy something, and the elder stepped back. The council dispersed gradually, conversations resuming in low tones. Elias exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "You did well," Elith said quietly as they moved away. "I'm not sure what well looks like here," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Neither was I once," she said. They entered a quieter corridor, its walls textured with faintly glowing patterns. The hum of the station softened, replaced by a sense of privacy. Elith slowed, then stopped, turning to face him fully. "This is where clarity matters," she said. Elias waited, sensing the gravity in her tone. "You will be watched," she continued, "your actions interpreted beyond your intent." "That seems to be a theme," he said. She acknowledged the remark with a brief nod. "What you do next will shape how this path unfolds," she added. Elias considered her words, then spoke carefully. "I don't want to cause harm," he said. "Not to you, or your people." Her gaze softened, something like relief flickering across her face. "That desire is not universal among those brought into power," she said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My people value strength," she said, "but we have learned that strength without empathy fractures." Elias felt the weight of shared understanding settle between them. "Humans learned that the hard way too," he said quietly. Elith studied him, eyes searching. "Then perhaps," she said slowly, "this convergence is not as strange as it appears." A soft chime echoed, interrupting the moment. Elith straightened, the princess returning seamlessly. "Your quarters are prepared," she said. "You will rest before the next engagement." Elias nodded, fatigue creeping in now that adrenaline ebbed. They walked together again, this time in companionable silence. The corridor opened into a residential sector, warmer in tone and scale. Elith stopped before a doorway that irised open at her presence. "This will be yours," she said. Elias stepped inside, taking in the space with cautious awe. The room balanced alien design with subtle accommodations for human comfort. "It's more than I expected," he admitted. "You will need space to think," she replied. She lingered at the threshold, hesitation visible. "There is one more thing," she said. Elias turned back toward her. "If at any point you feel overwhelmed," she continued, "you may request my presence." The offer surprised him with its sincerity. "Thank you," he said, meaning more than the words conveyed. She inclined her head, then withdrew, the doorway sealing softly behind her. Elias stood alone, the silence settling around him. He moved to the window, gazing out at the stars beyond the station. The enormity of what lay ahead pressed in, but beneath it, a thread of resolve held firm. He had not chosen this beginning, but he could choose how he continued. As he prepared for rest, one thought returned again and again. A single smile had bridged worlds, and now it was up to him to decide what that bridge would carry forward. Elias slept in fragments, drifting through shallow dreams where the station lights became constellations and every voice he heard carried double meanings. When he finally woke, the room's ambient glow had shifted to a cooler hue, and a soft tone pulsed from the wall like a quiet knock. He sat up fast, heart thumping, then forced himself to breathe as the translator in his ear adjusted to the station's morning cycle. A thin panel near the door brightened with Elitha's sigil, elegant and sharp. He ran a hand through his hair, tried to look less like someone who had been dropped into a legend by mistake. "Enter," he said, and the door irised open with a whisper. Two attendants stepped in first, then Elith followed, composed as ever, wearing a darker mantle that made her look less ceremonial and more ready for conflict. "You rested," she said, eyes scanning him for signs of strain. "Enough," Elias replied, and the honesty made his throat tighten. One attendant set a tray on a low surface, releasing a faint aroma that was almost familiar, warm grain and spice, a deliberate attempt at comfort. Elith dismissed them with a glance, and the room became quieter, more intimate without meaning to. "We have little time," she said, tone steady. Elias nodded, bracing himself. "What's next?" he asked, already suspecting the answer would be heavy. Elith stepped closer to the window, looking out at the slow drift of stars. "The concourse," she said, "and the rite of naming." Elias felt his stomach drop, the words connecting to the announcement that still felt like a bad translation error. "You're going to introduce me again," he said. "Not again," she corrected, turning back to him. "Properly." He swallowed, trying to keep his voice even. "Is this about convincing your counsel," he asked, "or convincing someone else?" Elitha's eyes narrowed, and for the first time Elias saw irritation flash through her calm. "Both," she admitted. Then her expression softened, as if she hated that the truth had edges. "There is a faction," she continued, "that believes our contact with humans weakens us." Elias felt the implications settle into place like a piece of a puzzle he did not want to see completed. "They'll use me as proof," he said quietly. "They will use you as a target," Elith replied, and the bluntness made the air feel colder. Elias stared at her for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "Why keep me close," he asked, "if that makes things worse?" Elitha's gaze held his, unwavering. "Because if I do not claim the symbol," she said, "they will claim the story." She stepped toward him, and Elias realized she was not just protecting status, she was trying to control a narrative before it turned into bloodless collapse. "You smiled," she said, quieter now, "and they saw an omen." Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm not an omen," he said, not angry at her, but at the way the world could twist a harmless gesture into a weapon. "I know," she replied, and the sincerity hit him harder than comfort would have. They moved through the station together, flanked by guards who stayed just far enough away to pretend it was not an escort. The corridors felt different today, less like a museum of light and more like a fortress that happened to be beautiful. When they reached the concourse, Elias understood why Elith had chosen this place. It was immense, a circular chamber open to multiple levels, its center occupied by a dais shaped like a spiral, as if the floor itself had been coaxed into ceremony. Hundreds of Varelian citizens had gathered, their presence a living tapestry of color, motion, and sound. Their attention turned the instant Elith stepped into view, and a hush rolled outward like a wave. Elias felt that hush land on him too, and he forced himself not to shrink. Elith lifted her hand, and the crowd's silence deepened. Then she spoke, her voice amplified not by harsh speakers but by the station itself, as if the walls agreed to carry her words. "By witness and accord," she declared, "the human Elias Rourke stands under my protection and my name." Elias's pulse spiked, but he kept his face composed, eyes forward. Elith continued, her tone measured, her phrasing precise, each line sounding like it had survived centuries of scrutiny. "In our history, trust given freely becomes a bond tested by consequence." She turned slightly, looking at him, and Elias felt like the entire chamber narrowed into that one moment. "He did not know our meaning," she said, "yet he did not flee our weight." A murmur rose, not hostile, but stirred, like wind shifting direction. Elias sensed movement at the edges, subtle clusters of people leaning, whispering, recalculating. Then an elder stepped forward, the same sharp-eyed council member from before, and Elias's muscles tensed. The elder's voice rang out, formal and clear. "Princess Elith," they said, "do you bind yourself to this claim before the concourse?" Elith did not hesitate. "I bind my honor," she replied. Elias felt a strange flicker of respect, because she was placing herself at risk, not hiding behind tradition. The elder turned their gaze to Elias, and the translator in his ear sharpened every syllable. "Human Elias," they said, "do you stand willing to be named within our right?" Every instinct in Elias screamed that he was not ready, that he needed time, that he needed a way out. But he also saw what Elith had meant by obligation, by story, by the cost of refusal. He was not being asked to surrender his future forever in this instant. He was being asked to take the next step in understanding. He looked at Elith, and she met his eyes with a steadiness that felt like a hand on his shoulder. Elias drew a breath. "I stand willing," he said, and his voice did not crack. The crowd reacted instantly, a swell of sound that rolled through the concourse, not applause exactly, but a collective exhale of tension releasing into something like exhilaration. Elith's shoulders eased by the smallest degree, and Elias realized how much she had been holding back. The elder raised a thin, shimmering band, not metal, not fabric, but something in between, alive with faint light. They moved toward Elias, and for a heartbeat he wondered if he should kneel, if there was a posture he was supposed to take. Elith subtly shifted her hand, indicating stillness, and Elias stayed upright. The band hovered near his wrist, then settled with a gentle warmth, like a pulse syncing with his heartbeat. A soft chime sounded as it locked, and the translator flashed a warning, then stabilized. Elias felt a brief dizziness, as if a system had handshaken with another system inside his body. "What is this?" he asked under his breath, trying not to panic. Elith leaned close enough that her words were for him alone. "A vow sigil," she whispered. "It proves intent when words are questioned." Elias's blood ran cold. "Intent," he repeated, eyes fixed forward while his mind raced. "Yes," Elith said, voice steady, "and it will protect you, because it binds me too." Before he could respond, the elder's voice rose again. "By right, the claim is recognized," they announced. "By right, the future is permitted to form." The phrasing struck Elias as carefully chosen, leaving space for what came next, for choice, for time, for reality to catch up with symbolism. Then the concourse shifted, as if the ceremony had been the opening note of something larger. Attendants moved, guards tightened formation, and a new tension entered the chamber, sharper than before. Elias noticed it first as a change in sound, a faint stutter in the station's hum. The lights in the upper ring flickered once, so brief most people might miss it. But Elias had spent his life listening to machines, and he knew the difference between normal variation and a warning. He turned his head slightly, scanning the upper levels, eyes catching on a maintenance panel that should have been sealed. It was open by a fraction, and behind it, darkness moved. His mouth went dry. Elith sensed his shift immediately. "What is it?" she murmured without looking at him, keeping her posture regal for the crowd. Elias forced his voice low. "Something's wrong with the station," he said, "and I think it's not an accident." Elitha's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. She made a subtle gesture, and one of her guards responded instantly, eyes tracking where Elias had looked. Another flicker rippled through the lights, longer this time, and a hush began to spread as the crowd noticed. The station's core light dimmed by a fraction, like a lung hesitating before the next breath. Elias's engineer brain snapped into focus, fear transforming into a clean, cold clarity. "Power routing," he muttered, watching the patterns of illumination. "If someone's diverting load, they could trigger a cascade." Elitha's voice came tight. "Can you stop it?" she asked. "I can try," Elias replied, and realized he meant it. The station's public announcement system chimed, then cut off mid-tone, replaced by static. That static was the last polite warning before chaos. A sudden tremor ran through the floor, small but unmistakable, and the concourse erupted into alarmed murmurs. Guards moved, forming a protective ring around Elith, but Elias stepped closer to the dais edge, eyes locked on the maintenance panel above. A figure dropped from the upper level onto a walkway, moving with practiced speed, and Elias saw a glint of something in their hand that looked like a device, compact and purposeful. Not a tool, not maintenance gear, something designed to disrupt. Elias's pulse thundered, but his mind stayed sharp. "If they breach the core's stabilizers," he said quickly, "this whole ring could lose containment." Elitha's gaze hardened. "Then we move," she said. They ran. Not a graceful retreat, but a decisive, coordinated sprint through a corridor that guards cleared ahead of them. Elias felt the vow sigil on his wrist warm again, as if responding to adrenaline. They reached a service access door, and Elith pressed her palm to it, unlocking it with a sharp hiss. Inside, the space narrowed into a maintenance artery, lined with conduits and access nodes. Elias's eyes snapped to a diagnostic panel, and he felt a surge of grim relief, something he could understand at last. "Give me 30 seconds, he said, already pulling up schematics, fingers moving fast. Elith stood behind him, blade-like focus aimed down the corridor, listening for pursuit. Elias watched the power map bloom across the display, saw the abnormal draw, saw the deliberate reroute. Someone was trying to starve the stabilizer arrays just enough to force a controlled failure, a disaster that could be blamed on human presence, on royal arrogance, on anything convenient. He clenched his jaw. "No," he whispered, and started rewriting routes, pushing power back into the stabilizers while shunting non-essential load into dormant systems. The panel resisted, security protocols fighting him, but Elias spoke softly to the machine, the way he always did when coaxing stubborn systems into cooperation. He found an overlooked manual override, old and unloved, and used it like a lever. The lights in the corridor steadied slightly, and the hum regained a smoother rhythm. But the map still showed a threat moving closer, an external device feeding interference into the network. "We're not done," he said, breathless. Elith leaned in. "Tell me what you need," she said, and Elias heard something rare in her voice, trust without calculation. "I need to get to the disruption node," he replied, pointing at the schematic. "It's 2 corridors over, near the upper concourse feed." Elith nodded once. "Then we go," she said. The maintenance corridor shook as another tremor passed through the station, stronger than before, rattling conduits and sending a low groan through the metal walls. Elias stumbled, caught himself on a handrail, and felt the vow sigil on his wrist flare with heat, sharp enough to sting. Ahead, warning lights began to pulse in irregular patterns, confirming his fear that the disruption was accelerating. Elith moved beside him without hesitation, her presence a steady anchor amid the growing chaos. Her guards fell back slightly, spreading out to secure intersections and watch for pursuit. The station no longer felt like a breathing city, but a body under sudden strain. Elias forced his breathing slow, narrowing his focus to the problem in front of him. They reached the junction he had marked, a wider chamber where multiple power lines converged into a single armored conduit. The disruption node was there, unmistakable now, a foreign device clamped onto the conduit like a parasite, its surface shimmering with unstable energy. Elias felt a flicker of awe despite himself at the elegance of the sabotage. Whoever had built it understood the station's design intimately. "That's it," he said, pointing, voice tight. Elith followed his gaze, eyes hardening. "Can you remove it?" she asked. "Yes," Elias replied, then corrected himself. "Probably." He moved closer, scanning the device, fingers itching to tear into it. "It's not just draining power," he said. "It's feeding false stability data back into the system." Elith frowned. "So the station thinks it's fine," she said. "Until it isn't," Elias answered. He crouched, pulling up a portable interface, linking it to the conduit. The device reacted instantly, its surface pulsing faster as if aware it was being challenged. Elias's display filled with cascading alerts, layers of encrypted logic fighting his intrusion. "This is not a human design," he muttered. Elith knelt beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence even through adrenaline. "Who would do this?" she asked quietly. Elias shook his head. "Someone who wants the station to fail without firing a single shot," he said. A distant clang echoed down the corridor, followed by the unmistakable sound of hurried movement. "We have company," one of the guards reported, voice sharp over the comm. Elith rose smoothly, placing herself between Elias and the corridor entrance. "You have time," she said, not asking, but declaring. Elias nodded, teeth clenched, fingers flying across the interface. He ignored the noise, the fear, everything except the logic unfolding in front of him. The device's core pulsed brighter, spiking interference into the network. Elias felt sweat bead at his temples. "I can shut it down," he said, "but if I do it wrong, it could dump all that energy at once." Elith did not look back. "Do it right," she said simply. The trust in those two words hit him harder than panic ever could. He took a breath, then another, and began isolating the device's feedback loop. The first shot rang out down the corridor, energy fire splashing against a guard's shield in a burst of light. The guards responded instantly, forming a defensive line, returning fire with disciplined precision. Elias felt the vibration through the floor, but he did not look up. He found the core regulator, buried under layers of alien logic, and smiled grimly. "This part," he murmured, "you didn't lock down." With a swift sequence of commands, he severed the loop and rerouted the excess energy into the station's capacitors. The device shrieked, a high, keening sound that set Elias's teeth on edge. Then it went dark. The lights in the corridor steadied, the station's hum smoothing into a familiar, healthy rhythm. Elias sagged back on his heels, breath coming fast. "It's done," he said, hardly believing it himself. Elith turned, relief flashing across her face before composure reclaimed it. "Stand down," she ordered the guards. The attackers retreated almost immediately, disappearing into maintenance shafts with practiced efficiency. They had never intended to fight for long, Elias realized. The damage, not the confrontation, had been the goal. He pushed himself to his feet, legs trembling now that the crisis had passed. Elith reached out, steadying him, her hand firm on his arm. "You saved the station," she said, voice low and intense. Elias shook his head weakly. "I just did my job," he replied. "Your job," Elith said, "has altered the balance of power." They made their way back toward the concourse, alarms fading as systems returned to normal. News of the stabilized core spread quickly, carried by the station itself. When they emerged, the crowd was still there, anxious energy crackling through the air. A hush fell as Elith stepped forward again, Elias at her side, vow sigil still faintly glowing. She raised her hand, and the station carried her voice once more. "There was an attempt to fracture our home," she declared. "Not through strength, but through deception." Murmurs rippled through the gathered citizens. "This human saw the threat," she continued, "and acted, not for reward, but because failure would harm us all." Elias felt dozens of gazes settle on him, no longer curious, but assessing with new weight. "In that moment," Elith said, "he chose us." The words echoed, heavy with implication. The elder stepped forward again, expression unreadable. "The right permits re-evaluation," they said. "Do you reaffirm the claim?" Elith turned to Elias, and for the first time since they had met, her certainty softened into a question. The choice was his now, truly. Elias felt the weight of Earth, of his old life, of everything he had been before this station. He also felt the memory of systems stabilizing under his hands, of trust given without guarantee. "I don't know what the future holds," Elias said, voice carrying farther than he expected. "But I know walking away now would be a lie." He met Elitha's eyes. "I'm willing to keep learning," he said, "to see where this leads." The vow sigil warmed, no longer sharp, but steady, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. Elith inclined her head deeply, a gesture of respect reserved for equals. "Then the future remains open," she said. The elder nodded slowly. "The claim stands," they announced. This time, the reaction was different, a surge of approval that felt earned rather than imposed. Elias let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the moment he smiled. Later, when the crowds dispersed and the station settled back into its endless motion, Elias stood again by the window in his quarters. Stars drifted past, silent and indifferent witnesses. Elith joined him without ceremony, standing at his side. "You could have refused," she said softly. "Yes," Elias replied. "But then I'd always wonder what I walked away from." She studied him, something like admiration in her eyes. "In my culture," she said, "that curiosity is considered a noble flaw." He smiled, smaller this time, deliberate, aware of its weight. Whatever lay ahead would not be simple. Politics, resistance, misunderstandings, and consequences waited beyond the next sunrise cycle. But Elias felt something new settle into place, not certainty, but resolve. A single human smile had become a bridge between worlds. Now, step by careful step, he intended to learn how to walk it without breaking what lay on either side.